It has been regarded as one of the greatest video gaming consoles of all time. With over 717 games released in North America, it would go on to sell 49 million units worldwide. It brought many classics that to this very day have been regarded as some of the best in the 16-bit era of games ever released. Super Mario World, the original Star Fox, RPGs like Final Fantasy III, Earthbound, and Chrono Trigger, the first three Mega Man X games, and among many others. While they were able to release tons of games for many to play, it did also have its fair share of titles that never got finished, but one reason or another was never released to the general public. Two known franchises were originally intended to be showcased on the console, but in turn would inevitably be passed on to even more powerful 32 and 64-bit hardwares that outmatched the Super Nintendo's capabilities. On this edition of The Uncommon Valley, we look at two known prototypes that were fully completed but never released, as we take a closer look at Rayman 1 and Killer Instinct 2 for the Super Nintendo. Michael Ansel was one of two developers working on the original version for Rayman 1. While the original project was scrapped and eventually made for other consoles, the earlier prototype of the game had surfaced on the internet that shows how the game was being developed. At the very beginning of the story, the main character, Jimmy, who creates a whole world using his computer, which he calls here It's Cool. But the computer is infected with a virus, and Jimmy gets himself into his own creation. He then has to defeat the virus in order to be able to escape that virtual world. Once inside, Jimmy recruits the character Rayman, which in turn would be the title of the game itself. When the discussion of the name Rayman was brought up, Michael would go on to mention that it was because of the ray tracing software that Ubisoft was using at that time to help create the original game. On top of that, Michael also mentioned that the game was intended to be a two-player experience, in which both players would cooperate together in order to be able to progress through the game. While one player would control Rayman, the other would control a female version of Rayman instead. However, the two-player mode was never finalized, and the prototype version instead featured a single-player mode. In the earliest days of making the game, developers featured the earlier version of the Dream Forest and Caves of Scops. This suggests that developers were experimenting with various features that would eventually be used in future games. The various assets in the game include story, game art, graphics, and enemies reveal the earlier versions of Mr. Scops, Antitoons, Plums, Tings, and the Flying Rings. Even details as minor as mushrooms, big powers, and the telescopic fists are shown in the published articles about Rayman 1. This suggests that although this version was never launched, it was something where earlier in-game elements were tested upon. The earliest depiction of Rayman was developed differently than what we got to see in the Jaguar and onward versions. Rayman's body is red in the prototype version, while the retail release we got to know him as purple. Rayman's hands were smaller in the prototype version, while in the Jaguar version, Rayman's hands would be bigger and would also feature extra details that were added in. Developers had also made Rayman's body a bit bigger to reflect a robust character, and this is why the features like charging the fist into a golden one was added into this version. Even Rayman's shoes were yellow, while soles were black in the earlier versions as well. During the idle position, developers wanted to give Rayman a signature style. This is why he was given the feature of wiping his mouth and breakdancing. However, with the launch of the higher disc-based consoles, the team decided to give up on the Super Nintendo version of Rayman, and the release of the game would then be cancelled. Even though it never made its way to Super Nintendo, Rayman's character survived and was featured on the Atari Jaguar, Sony's PlayStation 1, and the Sega Saturn. Rayman would also get an entry that was later released for the Game Boy Advance as part of the Rayman 10th Anniversary Collection. While Rayman got its real start after the debut of the Sony PlayStation, there's no telling how successful it would have got had it stuck onto the Super Nintendo first. It is possible that they could have released it on the console alongside the disc-based versions, but Ubisoft probably didn't want to pump any more money into a version they thought would have undersold compared to the others. The ROM is available online to check out, and to see just what might have been the earliest depictions of Rayman's journey into the video gaming realm. After the successful launch of Killer Instinct and after over 3.2 million copies sold, Nintendo had plans to move forward with Rare to develop the sequel for the Super Nintendo. Founded by Tim and Chris Stamper, they had the task of developing Killer Instinct 2, and seemed as though everything was going smoothly and to get it out in a timely order. According to developers that were on the team, Killer Instinct 2 was over 99% completed. To begin work on the sequel, artists and developers at Rare worked on the various game arts and features for Killer Instinct. Even the minor details were paid attention to, and would be made more flawless to be shown in the sequel for the Super Nintendo. There were countless ideas for the sequel originally, however, Rare admits that it was not possible to add everything into the first Killer Instinct when it was released. The team met various players who played Killer Instinct and took notes on how their experience was. With them having enough notes on hand, they could go on to work on the new features for Killer Instinct 2. During development time, artists were actively modifying frames to make the game impeccable. Even during the last few weeks of the final prototype, artists were still upgrading and adding more graphics to the already finalized version. The idea was not to leave even a minor decisive thing out of the newest entry. But when the game was 99% completed, a lead of the project said that they would be leaving Rare. However, in order to get this version done, Nintendo would reach out to Brendan Gunn, who was working at Rare at the time, to help lead and complete the project. When asked about his time on trying to finish the Killer Instinct 2 Super Nintendo project, Brendan Gunn went on to say, "I did some work on Killer Instinct 2 on the Super Nintendo. The guy in charge of the project left the company when it was 99% finished, and they asked me to finish it, a game I'd never even seen or played before, in 6 weeks. That was an interesting job. We got it finished, a little bit late actually, but it was all for nothing. We were under contract with Nintendo and simply had to get it done, but they ultimately decided not to publish it." Later on, the arcade versions of Killer Instinct 2 was launched in 1996, and then the Nintendo 64 version would be called Killer Instinct Gold, and would be launched a month after the console's launch in North America on November 25th. How the earliest version of Killer Instinct 2 looked is still a mystery, but one that we may not ever get the chance to see. That is until 2015 when Tim Stamper tweeted a picture of a bunch of gaming equipment, and from what we can spot is none other than the very prototype for Killer Instinct 2, which is indicated on the ROM chips next to the console. While he posted up photos with no promises to showcase the actual gameplay, this is concrete evidence that the close to near completed version for the Super Nintendo still does exist. This very prototype could showcase off how the original version looked, but it is possible that there is a reason for him not being able to show off the prototype. The story of these two known prototypes tell of an era that was coming to a close for the 16-bit generation of consoles. Had they had more development time, it is possible that they would have been considered swan songs for an already excellent library of games. But that much we can say as being categorized as nothing more than a what-if scenario. Check out the other videos on our channel today for more obscure video gaming history, and thank you for watching The Uncommon Valley as we look to the past into the present.